All right, guys, before we get started, are there any questions over the homework sheet? So factoring. So we're going to be continuing factoring today. The main factoring that we did on Thursday was just when a was 1, the number in front of x squared. Because the general form of all of our quadratics come in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. So the ones we did on Thursday, the value of a was 1. Now there were a handful that the value of a wasn't 1, but once we took out the greatest common factor, it went back to being 1, and we went through the steps accordingly. Now today, we're going to do more factoring. There will be some that have a greatest common factor. All the ones we'll have today will have an a value different than 1. So we look at this first one here. 7x squared minus 31x minus 20. Again, the first thing we should look for is the greatest common factor. And 7, 31, and 20, well, none of these have a greatest common factor. There's not a number that will go into all three, or a variable. So we move on to step 2, our 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. And again, the 3 spaces are there just to make sure we have the parentheses wide enough to fit everything in. Our third step is to find the sign. We look at the third term. If the third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. If the third term is negative, our signs are opposite. So one's going to be positive and one is negative because here our third term is negative. So that takes us to step number 4, our factors of the first and third terms. And if there's only one set of factors, we'll just plug them in, because step 5 is to plug and check. So if we look at 7x squared, well, the only factors of x squared are x and x. And as we saw on Thursday, we did kind of work one out where we looked at x1 and x squared, and we saw that the one side set of parentheses that would have the 1 with our x squared just became a single number. It didn't work out at all. We have to have a variable in both spots. Well, the factors of 7 are what? 1 and 7. So we just need to pick a spot to put the 7. Where would we like to try putting it first? First 7. So we do 7x and x. And the reason we do this is 1, as we said already, x squared, x and x is the only set of factors. So we're just going to throw it in. 7's only set of factors are 1 and 7. So we plug in the 7. Technically, we did plug in the 1, but we don't have to write it. Factors of 20. Well, there's more than one set of factors. 1 and 20. 2 and 10. 4 and 5. And at this point here, we just need to pick a set of factors and check it. 4 and 5. 4 first, 5 second. And at this point, we can check. Now, we're not going to have to multiply the 7x and x, because that's going to give us 7x squared. And well, we got 7x and x from 7x squared. 4 and our negative 5 came from negative 20, so we don't necessarily need to check those. But our 7x times negative 5 is negative 35x. Our positive 4 times x would be plus 4x. And negative 35x plus 4x is negative 31x. Now, if you have trouble or sometimes have some difficulty with doing this multiplication step, it is possible to do these in the calculator. We just can't do it entirely because we can't plug x in. But for our 7x times negative 5, we can still do 7 times negative 5 in the calculator. 7 times negative 5 would give us negative 35. Our 4 times x, 4 times 1 gives us 4. In the calculator, we can then plug in negative 35 plus 4. We're just removing the x and seeing what we get, and we can put it back. Does that make sense? That is the middle term we wanted, so these are our factors. If we wanted to write it the other way, having it as x minus 5 times 7x plus 4 is the exact same thing. It's just written in the other order. Questions on this here? Let's look at the next one. 2b squared plus 17b plus 21. Is there a greatest common factor? No. So we'll have our two sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Then we move on to our signs. If the third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. If the third term is negative, our signs are opposite. Well, here the third term is positive. So the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. And since the middle term is positive, our signs are both positive. Now we need to find the factors of the first and third terms. Well, 2b squared, well, the b squared is just going to be b and b. Factors of 2 are 2 and 1. So we'll put a 2 with one of them and 1 with the other. Now, especially if the signs are both positive or both negative, this matters even less than it did on the previous one. Because if the signs are opposite, we can look a little deeper into which one goes where to reduce the number of times we have to guess and check. But especially if the signs are the same, just throw it in. 21. Well, 1 and 21, or 3 and 7. We can try 3 and 7. And we can check this here. So the first thing we can do is 2b times 7. Well, 2 times 7 is 14, and we still have the b, so 14b. 3 times b is plus 3b, giving us positive 17b. Is that what we wanted? So these are the correct factors. If we didn't get those, the first thing I would switch is, in this case, would be the 3 and 7. I switch that second set of terms first, try it again. Then I would go to the 1 and 21 and try it in both ways. And if that didn't work, then I would look for other factors of the number in front of b. And if it looks like none of them work, again, one of the ways we can check to make sure it is indeed factorable is our square root of b squared minus 4ac. Because if this gives us a integer, our 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, our counting numbers, then it is factorable. If it gives us a decimal, radical, or if the 30xs throws it out as domain error, it means it's not factorable. Questions on this here before we move on to the next one? 7x squared minus 45x minus 28. Is there a greatest common factor? I'm thinking 7. The only one, because I know 7 does go into 48. It's 4 and 7. The question is with 45. Well, here we go. 45 divided by 7 is very close. But 7x squared and 28 do have a greatest common factor of 7. But because the middle term does not also have a greatest common factor of 7, it unfortunately doesn't work. So we'll have to just move on to our two sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Finding the sign. Positive and negative, because if the third term is negative, our signs are opposite. Questions on this here before we move on to the factors? Factors of the first and third term. Well, factors of 7x squared will have x and x, because that's the only factors of x squared is x and x. Factors of 7 are 7 and 1. Where do we want to put the 7? First one or second one? Okay. We'll put it there. Because again, one of the things I think is sometimes the most challenging with factoring is just figuring out where to put it. And if you're not sure or not confident on where to put it, just throw it in one spot. Now the factors of 28 is, well, 1 and 28, 2 and 14. Is 3 a factor of 28? So what's the sum of 2 and 8? 10, yes? Is 10 divisible by 3? No. So 28 is not. Sum of the digits. If the sum of the digits is divisible by 3, then the number is also. So here it's not. But we have 4 and 7. 5 does not work because it doesn't end in a 0 or 5. And nothing else works because 6 would be the next number. For 6 to work, the number has to be divisible by 2 and 3. So we're done. These are the factors. Which one do we want to try first? 2 and 14? Okay. Which one do we want to put first? We can do this here. And the last thing we need to do is check this here. So the first one we're doing is 7x times negative 14. Well, we know the number will be negative. And again, as I said earlier, we can do these in a calculator. Negative 14 times 7. I just don't put the x, the variable, in. So negative 14 times 7 is negative 98x. R2 times x is plus 2x, giving us negative 96x. Now, we can switch the 2 and 14. In this case, it's not going to work, and I can show you here in a minute different ways we can see why. But with the ones we did on Thursday, switching them, especially with the signs being opposite, it mainly just switched the sign. But here, the number in front of x are not the same. Here we have 1 and 7. So it will change the value if we switch this. You don't have to write this down. Because if we put 14 in 2 and check this here, 7x times negative 2 would be negative 14x. And 14 times x would be plus 14x, giving us 0. So we can see from checking it, it does not give us the middle term we wanted. But if we look in that first set of parentheses, 7x and our 14, do they have a greatest common factor? Well, 7, yes? Which means we could technically factor it out. But if we could factor that out, it means the original one should have had a greatest common factor as well. Since it doesn't, it tells us that 14 cannot go here. We have tried it in both ways. So we can do 4 and 7 next, yes? What of those two numbers cannot go with our 7x? 7, because then 7x and 7 would have a greatest common factor. It would factor out. It means this has to be 4, and most likely this has to be 7. Questions on this here? And if we check this here, 7x times negative 7 is negative 49x. Our positive 4 times x would be plus 4x, giving us negative 45x. And that's the middle term we wanted. So these are our factors. It's just 1x. If there is a variable there, we don't have to write the 1 in. If there hadn't been a variable there, then we would write 1.
All right. I got you.
Questions on this one here? You ready for the next one? 5p squared minus p minus 18. Greatest common factor? No, there's not one. So our 2 parentheses with 3 spaces. And yes, since the third term is negative, our signs are opposite. So one is going to be positive, one is negative. All right, factors of the first and third term. So factors of 5p squared, well, we would have p and p. And our factors of 5 are only 1 and 5. Well, we've been putting 5 in the first spot, so might as well, let's just keep the pattern going. 18 does have more than one set of factors. We have 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. 4 is not divisible by 18, and that's it. Because it'd be 4 times 4.5 or something close to that. And we're trying to get it to be negative 1. So 1 and 18, 2 and 9, or 3 and 6. I wouldn't completely rule out 1 and 18, but I'd put it at the very bottom. Yes? 9 and 2. Which one goes first? 9, 2. And we can check this here. Now, one of the things I will definitely say and emphasize here, just because you don't see it immediately or pick it out immediately, that's not bad. Because again, that's one of the more challenging parts of this is just the guess and check. And when we check this here, 5p times negative 2 is negative 10p. Our 9 times p is plus 9p. Negative 10p plus 9p is negative p, which is the middle term we wanted. Questions on this here? How do we feel with these here? We're going to skip a few then. So, the next one I want to look at is this one here. So we're skipping the 2 after this. Part of the greatest common factor, yes. So the next one we're looking at is this here, 28 n to the 4th plus 16 n cubed minus 80 n squared. So yes. So this one here does have a greatest common factor of 4, because 4 is divisible by 28, 16, and 80, yes? But we also have n squared, because they all do have n. The smallest exponent is 2, so we can take out 40 n's, or 4n squared. Because when we factor it out of 28 n to the 4th, well, our 28 divided by 4 is 7. Let's focus up here. N squared. Because we're removing 2 of the n's from n to the 4th, giving us n squared. Plus. So when we divide take 4 out of 16, which gives us 4, and when we take 2 n's away from n cubed, we just have n. Minus 80 divided by 4 is 20. And the n squared factors out completely. Now, there is no other greatest common factors between 7, 4, and 20. We'll do our 2 sets of parentheses. At this point, we're finding the sign. So here, our third term is our negative 20. And since the third term is negative, our signs are opposite. One is going to be positive. One is going to be negative. Now we need to find the factors of the first and third term. First term is our 7n squared. So we will have n and n. So we'll put 7 in the first one because, again, here the factors of 7 are just 7 and 1. We only have one set. The factors of the third term would be factors of 20. So 1 and 20. Then 4 and 5. And now we need to pick between these three here to get to 4. So we do 4 and 5, and again, we can check this here. 7n times negative 5 is negative 35n. 4 times n would be plus 4n, giving us negative 31n. Yes. Because I'm going to go on and do 5 and 4 just because, again, we can switch it. 7n times negative 4 would be negative 28n. 5 times our n would be plus 5n, giving us negative 23n. So we've tried both. We can remove those there. And as y'all were saying, 10 in the first, 2 in the second, yes? And if we did this here, 7n times 2 would be negative 14n. 10 times n would be plus 10n, giving us negative 4n, which indeed we would need to change the signs because we do get the correct number but wrong sign. So if we flip the signs, negative and positive, our 7n times 2 would now be positive 14n. Negative 10 times n would be negative 10n, giving us 4n. Questions on this here? So for one like this here, especially when we got the negative 4n, if we had switched the 10 and 2, instead of switching the signs, it would have given us completely different middle term. So it's easier just to switch the sign than it is to switch the number. Because if we had switched the 10 and 2, we would also have to switch the 7n and n to get it to match up correctly. And for our answer, we do need the whole thing because the 4n squared is a part of our answer. So it'd be 4n squared times n minus 7n minus 10 times our n plus 2. Questions on this here? Let's look at the next one here. 3b cubed minus 5b squared plus 2b. Well, 3, 5, and 2, is there a greatest common factor between our three numbers? Well, no. Is there a greatest common factor between our variables? Because we have a b cubed, b squared, and b, yes? They all have at least one b in common, so we can remove it from each term. The 3 stays the same, but I can remove a b from b cubed, giving us b squared minus. Well, our 5b squared, if we remove a b from it, becomes 5b plus our 2b becomes 2. Now we're going to see if we can factor our 3b squared minus 5b plus 2. And I believe there is a good chance we can factor this. Since our third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term, which is negative. So we have negative and negative. Factors of the first and third term, so our b squared would indeed be b and b. Factors of 3 are 1 and 3. Pretty much every single one we've done today, there's only been one set of factors for the first term. Doesn't mean there's always going to be. I mean, it's just plugging in different ones. Because if it was 1 and 3, 2 and 6, then we would plug the other ones in. Well, it'd be 1 and 6 and then 2 and 3. But we'd pick one and try it. There isn't one. Yeah, we'll have one at least today that does work that way. Factors of 2 are 1 and 2. There's only one set, so we can just plug them in. And the last thing we can do is check this here. And the middle term we're going for is negative 5b. Well, 3b times negative 2 is negative 6b. Negative 1 times b is negative 1b, or just negative b. Negative 6b minus b, negative 6 minus 1 is indeed negative 7. Is that the middle term we wanted? No. So what we can do is switch the 1 and 2. We can try this again. 3b times negative 1 is negative 3b. Negative 2 times b is negative 3b minus 2b, or negative 3 minus 2 is negative 5b. Is that the middle term we wanted? Questions on this here? Any questions on any of this so far? We ready to look at the next one? I think one more will be good, yes? I think we're getting the hang of this, and as I said last year, the more of these that we do, the quote unquote easier they'll get, the more we can see the patterns in which ones go where. Now, if we look at this here, greatest common factor should be one of the first things we look for. So if we're looking at 30, 87, and 30, one number that we know will go into all three is what? 3, yes? Could there be one bigger? Maybe. But we do know 3 for sure, yes? So we can start off by factoring out the 3. Is there anything else in common with all 3 terms? B, because we do have a B in every single one, so we can factor 3B out. If we factor 3 out of 30, we're left with 10 n squared. The B factors out completely. Minus 87 divided by 3 is 29. N. Because we didn't do anything with the n, so it still stays there, but the B factors out completely. Plus 10. Because our 30 divided by 3 is 10, and the B factors out completely. Now again, if we want to look back and see between 10, 29, and 10, if there's another greatest common factor, we could go from there. Well, the only factors of our two 10s is 1, 2, 5, and 10, and 29 is not divisible by 2, 5, or 10. It is divisible by 1, but that doesn't do anything. Helpful anyways. So, two sets of parentheses with three spaces. If the third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. If the third term is negative, our signs are opposite. Here the third term is positive, so the signs are the same and match the sign of our middle term. So negative and negative. Factors of the first and third term. Well, yes. So n squared is still n and n, yes? Now this is the first one we've had today where the first term did not have a single set of factors. So we can go on and list them out. 1 and 10 and 2 and 5 for the first term. The third term is also, well, 10. So we have 1 and 10 or 2 and 5. So for our first 10, do we want to try 1 and 10 first or 2 and 5? 2 and 5. It doesn't matter too much. We're going to start with that one. I'm going to put 1 and 10 just to kind of make a point here. So we have 1 and 10, yes? The other one that we could pick is, say, 2 and 5, yes? And in that first set of parentheses, we have what? 10n minus 2, yes? Is there a greatest common factor between those two terms? Well, 10 and 2 does have a greatest common factor of 2, okay? So that wouldn't work out. We switch it. Still has the greatest common factor, so neither 1 and 10 or 2 and 5 would work. If we flipped it, well, obviously 10 and 10. The other way would work here because we don't have a greatest common factor, so out of those four, only one of them has a chance to work. But we'll come back to it later because the one we want to try first is 2 and 5. 5 and 2. Because with the 5 and 2 in our second spots, we can't have it the other way because we'd have a greatest common factor with 2n and 2 and 5n and 5. Yes? So we can check this here. 2n times negative 2 is negative 4n. Negative 5 times 5n is negative 25n, giving us negative 29n. Is that what we wanted? Yes. Because we were looking back at this one here, not our original. So 3b times 2n minus 5 times 5n minus 2 is the correct answer. And again, if this hadn't worked, we would have switched the 5 and 2 if it was possible, which here it's not. Checked it. One more time. This is the only way it can work, yes. Any other questions on this here? In that case, we are finished with this here. Bless you. So part of the reason that the last set factoring 3 is going to take a little bit longer is because we're going over some of our special cases, which would be our difference of perfect squares, sum and difference of perfect cubes, and yes, for factoring by grouping.